De lo contrario, fue que la vez pasada con la pieza...
Uy, no,
porque se entró en grieta y la dejamos
salió,
suelta.
Porque además se salió.
No. Ese es el otro extremo, evitando eso. Sí, la proporción más esbelta.
La proporción más esbelta. Esta proporción.
¿Buscamos una tabla más de esas?
Ya es muy tarde para empezar eso. ¿Imposible? Bueno, no dije nada. Listo.
Sí, no, porque si para estas picos es barato.
Claro. Bueno.
Pero igual estamos en 5-5, ¿no? La bandera.
This is one of the sides of the furniture pieces that we're building. It has to look antique, has to look original. It starts with Doris making drawings. Once we have the furniture pieces, I get to build models in the computer. We simulate every single aspect of these furniture pieces. So after that, I create the plans, and I come down here and talk a little with Ramon, explain him angles and everything. And then he started by making the metal structure.
I feel like I'm kind of the engineer for Doris. I help her solving some specific problems. I'm not an engineer, but somehow I have a foot in each technical and creative things, so I can deal with both things. It was always my task, mainly was how to join those pieces. It's very difficult things to do. Doris always tries to make something kind of impossible.
Carlos does the modeling and work with Doris in that stage. With Ramon, eventually, they have to link themselves together through virtuality to reality. The piece works really from the inside to the outside. It's all given so that the surface of the piece is structurally accurate in every single millimeter. So beginning from the inside, we have a metal structure that's very rigid so that it could hold in every way. You don't see it, you'll never see it. Finally, this structure would hold the concrete in place so that it doesn't stick out, it doesn't crack, it stays stable when it's being cast. The surface has to prevail above everything else. But of course, the poetic meaning is which is in the surface. It's totally poetic.
My work is based not on my experience, but on somebody else's experience. Experience comes from the Latin word experire, which means to test, to prove, from the Latin word perire, which means peril, danger, and also from the Indo-European root per, which means going across. So experience means going across danger. So my work is about somebody else's experience, literally defined. I come from Colombia, a country where there's nothing but ruins. That's what wars, imperialism, colonialism left us. So that marks my perspective, and that's really the point. I am a third world artist. From that perspective, from the perspective of the victim, from the perspective of the defeated people, it's what I'm seeing. I'm looking at the world. So I'm trying to rescue that memory, if it could be possible. But of course, I don't succeed. So that's why my work does not represent something. It's a hint of something. It is trying to bring into our present something that is no longer here. So it is subtle. I have a group of people who, in the most generous way, help me to make the pieces. It is a collective effort. I work with architects, and this team of architects are continuously giving me their creativity, their ideas, their input into the way the pieces could be made, even though I have a very precise idea of what I want. Imposible? They are the ones that are making that image possible. They are building it in material. The process of making a piece, it's sort of a schizophrenic game where you try to put your center in the center of the person you are interviewing, of the witness. And then you try to look at yourself from that perspective. For many years, I've been talking to victims of violence. After terrible events took place, I would go to the sites and interview people and gather objects. And my work was built based on the words that the witness have told me. So I used to think of myself as a secondary witness. As an artist, I have a responsibility. I have to look at historical events and work with whatever material is given to me. I don't work based on imagination or fiction. In the process of making Unland, I was embroidering hair on wood and going across with a needle through wood with hair. Of course, it's an insane gesture. It's an absurd gesture. And it is a huge, huge, absurd waste of energy. And we were working with a team of 15 people for 3 years, non-stop, on those pieces. So it reminded me of Paul Celan, the poet, where Celan said that it is only absurdity what shows the presence of the human. In that sense, but also I was related to the waste of lives here. It was the height of the paramilitary massacres in Colombia. It was my way of showing how lives could be wasted, but at the same time you could build something that was poetic, that could give testimony to the human presence and to the humanness of these victims and the fragility of life and the brutality of power. I think everything was there in that gesture of sawing through wood.
They were tables. They were tables together, very interesting joints, with old furniture like many of the pieces of Doris. My particular task was how to join them. I was helping to drill in those holes. I was drilling and drilling and drilling, millions of holes. And then it happens, some shots in the streets, and we hear, bah, 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 and something happened. I don't remember what it was. But it was blood in the street, something happened. And suddenly you understand why you have to make millions of holes. And it wasn't rational, but it makes sense. On that moment, it makes sense to make millions of holes, and like a monk doing it all the time, millions of holes.
What is that connection between? I was researching several cases of people that had been disappeared. Finally, I focused on one case, and I learned that in art, everything is particular, and the more particular and the more intimate you get, the more you can give in the piece. If I'm working with poor people, very poor people, there are minimum resources. So I limit my resources according to whichever testimony I'm working on. In Atrabiliarios, I had placed myself with minimum resources and working with the most despicable material you can think of, something that we all feel repelled by. Cow bladders on one hand, and old shoes. We don't like old shoes. But nevertheless, every time we see a shoe on the street, we wonder what happened there. So it's the wrong place for that shoe to be. I wanted to make that private pain into something public, because it is not a private problem, it is a social problem. That's why I made many niches in one space.
In the political realm of Colombia since 1948, there's been a period called the violence, la violencia, war, destruction, people being displaced, people so poor that they don't have any other option but get involved into narco traffic, all these bad things.
I was witness to the seizure of the Palace of Justice, where many, many people were killed. I was working 2 blocks away. The limits of violence seemed to be lost at that time in Colombia. The whole idea was to follow the tempo of the battle, of the seizure. We started at 11:35 a.m. sharp, because that was the time when the first person was killed. We had different objects falling down the facade at different tempos. It was the timing of it. It was very, very, very important. It was something that was happening through time, and time was certainly an essential element of this piece that lasted only 53 hours, which was the same time that the seizure lasted.
The set of plans was about 300 or 400 pages. Each paper was a time duration for this specific pattern. We were really performing through the directing of Doris, that she was downstairs in the street talking to us, and we were upstairs making it work. Everything was labeled, and there was a numbering that we had to follow, like in a musical piece. Well, you read music and you perform it. I was a small kid when this happened in 1985. My memory of it is very blurred, but somehow through this piece, it has become part of my own biography or biographical memory.
There was a little crack on the floor of the Tate, and Doris noticed it from the first visit and decided to make it the origin of this piece. This is the complete drawing that Doris made of 160 meters. Every single centimeter was drawn by hand by Doris. We did a research on cracks, how a crack behaves. We were examining how is the edge, how is the interior of cracks on ground, on concrete, on buildings. At the beginning, we looked like a bunch of crazy people in the street, staring down at cracks on floor or walls. Next step, try to figure out how to make a prefabricated crack and then export it to London. So we came up with the idea of making a metal structure, just like you make a typical slab of concrete, but with the shape of the rock. So here are the guys molding steel, following the exact, precise shape of the stone. Then we would pour concrete. The final result would be the cast with the mesh embedded with his twin, opposite twin. We constructed 320 meters of concrete because we had to do both of the faces of the crack. It went pretty much as we planned, but the image, the result, is something that you cannot imagine until you see it.
When I went to visit the space, before I thought of the piece, what struck me was the attitude of people that were walking in the space. Everybody looked up and they felt like it was an amazing space. And I was thinking, it's not that extraordinary. It's an industrial, modernist space. There are many, many more. It's not like you are entering Hagia Sophia or you're in front of the pyramids in Egypt. But people had that impression. And I thought it was unbelievably narcissistic. So what I wanted to do was to turn upside down that perspective. And instead of looking up, you have to look down as a way of seeing reality. So I wanted to inscribe in this modernist, rationalist building an image that was somehow chaotic and that marked a negative space. Because I believe there is a bottomless gap that divides humanity from inhumanity, or whites from non-whites. So I wanted to address that gap. And I thought that gap was mainly perceived in the history of modernity. When you read the history of modernity, it is narrated as an only European event. Nobody else participated in that. And the ideas of colonialism, of imperialism, are marginalized, to say the least. So I wanted this history of racism to come up, because I believe the history of racism, it's the untold dark side of the history of modernity. That's why I wanted this crack to break the building and to intrude in the building almost the same way a non-white immigrant intrudes in the sameness and consensus of white society. Shibboleth is a word that I took from Judges in the Bible. They describe this war between two Israeli tribes. The tribe that lost the war was attempting to cross the Jordan River to escape, and as they were crossing the river, they would request to pronounce the word Shibboleth. They could not pronounce it like that, and they pronounced it Siboleth. At that point, the Bible described a huge massacre. 42,000 people were killed right there. So I used the word because I was referring to the experience of racism, of the experience of crossing borders, the experience of the immigrant. So what it is to die making this attempt at crossing a border. The word that defines my work is impotence. I am completely impotent. I feel that I am responsible for everything that happens and that I simply arrive too late. I cannot give anybody back their father or their son. I cannot fix any problem. I can do nothing. It's a lack of power. But then, as a person who lacks power, I face the ones who have power and who manipulate life. It's from that perspective of the one who lacks power that I look at the powerful ones and at their deeds.